The real reason you can't be yourself. Around family, you're different around them. Even if you've changed, grown, become someone new, around your family, you quietly go back. Your tone shifts. Your reactions shrink. Your personality feels older, and you notice it, but you can't seem to stop it. So the question lingers. Why do you become someone else in the one place you should feel most like yourself? 2. Problem deep dive. It doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle. You walk into the room and something in you adjusts. Your voice becomes more careful. You hesitate before speaking. You filter things you wouldn't filter anywhere else. Even your thoughts feel different. You second-guess opinions you're normally confident about. You avoid certain topics. You stay quieter than usual. And if you try to act like your current self, it feels unnatural, like you're pushing against something invisible. So you stop. You fall back into what feels familiar. And later, when you're alone again, you notice the shift. Why was I like that? That's not who I am anymore. But next time, it happens again. This creates a strange disconnect. You have one version of yourself in the world, and another version at home. And they don't fully match. Over time, it can feel like your real self disappears in that environment. Not because you want it to, but because something in you won't let it stay. So what is that something? And why does it still have so much control? 3. Reframe. It's easy to assume this means you're being fake, or weak, or unable to be yourself. But that's not what's happening. You're not switching randomly. You're reverting. Your brain is returning to a version of you it learned early. Because in family environments, your identity wasn't something you chose. It was something that formed through repeated interactions. Roles were assigned, patterns were reinforced, and your brain encoded them as the safest way to exist in that space. So now, when you re-enter that environment, those patterns reactivate. Not because they're accurate anymore, but because they're familiar. And familiarity, to the brain, often feels like safety. But this raises a deeper question. Why does your brain trust the past version of you more than the current one? 4. Psychological mechanism. To understand this, you need to look at how identity is formed, especially early identity. As a child, your brain is highly adaptive. It learns quickly from feedback. What gets approval? What gets ignored? What creates tension? This process is shaped by something called implicit learning, where patterns are absorbed without conscious awareness. Over time, you develop behavioral roles. Maybe you became the quiet one, the responsible one, the easygoing one. Not by choice, but by repetition. These roles become encoded in neural pathways, especially in areas like the basal ganglia, which are responsible for habitual behavior. So instead of consciously deciding how to act, your brain runs a script, automatically. Here's the mental model. Imagine your identity as software. Your current self is the updated version, but your family environment still runs the old operating system. So when you enter that space, your brain loads the older version, not because it's better, but because it's what the system recognizes. At the same time, your brain is highly sensitive to social prediction. The prefrontal cortex constantly asks, what response is expected here? And with family, those expectations are deeply ingrained. So even if you've changed, your brain anticipates the same reactions and adjusts accordingly. This creates a loop. Old environment to old expectations to old behavior. And it happens faster than you can consciously interrupt, which is why it feels automatic. But automatic doesn't mean permanent. 5. Practical framework. Changing this pattern isn't about forcing yourself to act differently. It's about slowly updating the internal script your brain is running. 1. Notice the exact role you fall into. Before you change anything, you need to see the pattern clearly. What to do? Ask yourself, who do I become around them? Be specific. Quiet, agreeable, defensive. Why it works. This activates conscious awareness, which interrupts automatic habit loops in the basal ganglia. Real-life example. You realize you become overly agreeable. You say yes to things you wouldn't normally agree with. That clarity is the first shift. 2. Change one small behavior, not your whole identity. Trying to be fully yourself creates resistance. Your brain sees it as unpredictable. What to do? Pick one small behavior to adjust. Not everything, just one. Why it works. Gradual change reduces threat detection in the limbic system. Your brain accepts it more easily. Real-life example. Instead of changing how you speak entirely, you express one honest opinion. Just once. That's enough to begin. 3. Expect discomfort, and don't interpret it as failure. When you act differently, it will feel wrong, not because it is wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. Why it works. The brain equates familiarity with safety, so new behavior triggers mild stress responses. But this is part of rewiring. Real-life example. You speak more openly and feel awkward afterward. Instead of retreating, you recognize. This is the adjustment phase. 4. Redefine how you interpret their reactions. Part of the loop comes from expectation. You assume how they'll respond, so you act accordingly. What to do. Let their reaction happen before deciding what it means. Why it works. This reduces predictive bias in the prefrontal cortex. It allows real feedback instead of imagined outcomes. Real-life example. You expect criticism, but when you speak differently, nothing dramatic happens. That weakens the old pattern. 5. Create identity continuity outside the environment. Your brain needs reinforcement of your current self, not just internally, but through action. What to do? Strengthen your identity in other environments. Consistent behavior, clear expression. Why it works. Repeated actions build new neural pathways, making the updated identity more stable. Real-life example, you express yourself freely with friends or in work. Over time, that version becomes stronger and harder to override. 6. Integration. At its core, this isn't about confidence, it's about context. Your brain behaves differently based on where you are, and with family, it defaults to the earliest version of you it learned, not because that version is true, but because it's deeply encoded. So every time you enter that space, your brain asks, which version of me belongs here? And for now, it answers with the past. But that answer can change, not instantly, but gradually, through small repeated shifts, until one day, the version of you that exists everywhere else starts to exist there too. 7. Quiet, empowering. Close. You don't need to fight your past self. It was built for a reason. It helped you navigate something earlier in life. But you're not in that same place anymore, and your brain just hasn't fully caught up yet. So the goal isn't to erase that version of you. It's to update it. Gently, patiently, without forcing it to disappear. Because the more consistently you show up as who you are now, the less your mind will need to return to who you were. And maybe that's what change really looks like. Not becoming someone new, but allowing the current version of you to finally stay, even in the places where it once couldn't.